Welcome everybody to the Depths of Motherhood podcast. This is a special season dedicated to the tribe of the mother, but also I know any mothers listening will find this extremely valuable. I've created each episode to offer simple, digestible, and supportive information, which I hope will educate and inspire anyone who listens. So this is by popular demand. Please help us to educate and support the tribe holding the mother. Look forward to passionate and highly knowledgeable guests dedicated to reclaiming the essence of birth and embracing conscious parenting. Throughout our time together, our guests will serve as the guiding voices, illuminating the path towards a deeper understanding of preconception, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. This is with the mother and the baby being the center of the exploration. In the show notes, you'll discover the link to Nourished Mother package, which will offer many different resources to complement each episode. This is free for all members in the Women's Circle, or £33 for everybody who just wants to purchase the package. A heartfelt thank you to our incredible guests and immense gratitude to my partner for supporting me on this creation. And finally, last but not least, special thank you to Araya, my daughter, for being the endless well of inspiration. Welcome everybody to this week's episode. Today we welcome Kayalea onto the show. Kayalea is a herbalist, an integrative health coach, and educator devoted to earth and womb. She loves helping people deepen their connection to the power, pleasure, and wisdom in their womb space. She loves physiology and has a Master's of Science degree in therapeutic herbalism. And for years, she was a body worker, a doula, a student midwife, and that's really where she found this love for all things womb. She hosts the Herbal Womb Wisdom podcast and offers both in-person and online classes on topics like natural contraception and aphrodisia. She also does one-on-one herbal mentorship and integrative hormonal health coaching. I'll leave all her links in the show notes. And in this conversation, we really open it up to explore our relationship with nature. And she shares a beautiful practice that we can start doing today, where we can meet a plant without knowing what it is and seeing the effects that it has on our body as we receive the messages from it. And as we go into the questions around, well, what plants can be our allies during preconception? How can they support us in becoming juicy and fertile and moist and well nourished? Really, she starts at the foundation of health. What is our bodies telling us in this moment where there may be an imbalance? So that firstly, we can just come to this point of using practices, using plant allies to be able to come to a nourished, replenished baseline. And then from that place, we can continue to welcome in our plant allies to continue to soften and keep us moist and keep us connected. So it's not about taking these plants whilst you're asleep. It's about being present, awakening through our senses, creating this relationship and seeing how the body responds as we smell, as we taste, as we look at these plants. And then from there, we're really coming alive to be present in each moment. And then this human experience of preparing our body to receive a new soul becomes more curious and more inspirational and more enjoyable, more pleasurable. So when we come to meet our partner, we're meeting them in a place where we are filled up, we are abundant. And then there is this merging that happens, two souls welcoming in another soul and really having this collective experience with one another. So you might be thinking this podcast is just a list of herbs, and we do give a list of herbs and some recipes. Yet it's so much deeper than that. And I left this conversation feeling so inspired and actually it resonated very deeply with what I was exploring at the time, or what was coming through. And what was coming through was when things are seen within ourselves that can't be unseen. So something very recently happened where I did not receive the experience I was expecting. And I felt this heaviness, this twisting, this dullness inside of me. I felt like I wasn't worthy. I felt like I wasn't doing enough in this world. And I kind of decided that I would let this play out so that I could watch my reactions. So I sat in the seat of the observer. I felt the feelings and I looked to see where my mind went. My mind switched on and I felt this energy running through me. It scanned for things that inspired me, and I created something that I put into the world that I received instant gratification for. It went very well. It was successful. People approved of it. I felt good. Rushing through my body, I'm having this energy of like, yes, this is so inspiring, so exciting. And then I was like, wow, this is my life story of having this low self-worth, my mind creating something magnificent, putting it out, getting the feedback, and move on with my life. Oh, something else happens. I don't get the good feedback. Oh, I feel sad. So then my mind creates something and I keep putting it out. And I observed without interfering so that what needed to be seen could be seen. I was ready for it. I've been doing so much deep work recently, especially like in the women's circle. If you're in the membership, we've been going really deep. And I'm like, show me what I need to see. Show me the places where fears are still hiding, where I'm moving from conditioned beliefs, where I'm not moving from my heart or authentic self. And I saw it. I saw it very clearly. And then I had to make a decision. So, all right, what does this mean for my life? And first, I would just say, in an ideal unfolding, I would have sat with the uncomfortable feelings. I would have felt them all the way through. I would have let the energy move through me, whether I was dancing or singing or painting or maybe just laying and feeling the energy inside of my body, witnessing it with love and letting it dissolve. So that when I step back into the world, I wasn't moving from this place of fear. I was moving from a place of love. Now, in that place of love, I probably wouldn't have created the thing that I did. Yet I might have created something that didn't require external approval. I did it because it was a way of passing energy through my body so that I could come out of a stress response. So this thing that I could now not unsee, it has been the theme for this past few weeks. So if you're following the membership, you'll know I've been doing these readings, the moon readings, and really picking up on the collective energy. And it's this moving in between realities right now. Like we're stepping out of something known into something unknown. And yeah, that can be scary and it can bring up a lot. The ego gets scared that it's going to be forgotten and destroyed. So it tries to cling on in so many ways. Very, very creative, I will say. But I want to remind you, if you are one of the people that are feeling this, like you are courageous enough to hold this, to witness it, to see it all the way through, and to step forward more aligned with your heart, with your authentic self. And that might mean leaving some things behind. In my own life, I'm making the decision to pause the membership right now. We have a bunch of courses in there on the menstrual cycle, and on facilitating women's circles, on pelvic mapping, on fertility, on pregnancy. A bunch of stuff is in there. And the intention of the membership really was to gather every week for a live. And I'm seeing after 2 years, it's really difficult to gather people together. And of course, we all have our own rhythms, our own commitments. And I honestly don't want to be promoting this staring at a screen for an hour. So here I am on the other side. And I just want you to know that my energy will continue to flow into the podcast because I've sat with this and I'm like, yes, of course, it's like family now. It's been going for 3 years in November. So we will continue with this, but the membership will be paused for the lives. But everything in there is you can still access. So I'm keeping it open for anyone who wants to do the courses, but we'll be pausing on the lives until maybe something spontaneous comes through. But I'm really checking in. I'm taking time to be with my thoughts, be with my emotions, and really see what resonates deeply with me instead of pouring energy into things coming from a place of fear. All right, thank you so much for listening, and I really hope you love this conversation. Before we begin, let us just take a deep breath and realign our body so that we can feel into our entire being and create a space within us that feels gentle, that feels soft, that feels pleasurable, so that you can fully receive this conversation. Thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's a little gray outside and rainy, and I can kind of feel that in my inner emotional terrain too, but I'm happy to be here. I'm really grateful for the invitation.
Oh, yes, and we've been waiting so long to talk, so I'm really happy to be here. I have a cup of tea, like I'm feeling super cozy as well. So let's have a beautiful conversation. Before we do, I would love for you to share about how you got into working and communicating with plants. How did that come about?
Oh
How'd
my
you
gosh.
start that
Okay.
relationship?
It is, that's such a big, long story, but how can I begin it? Um, mm, I feel like every time this question is asked, something different comes out. So about 20 years ago, gosh, it was over 20 years ago, 21 years ago, I was in India. This is like where everything really started for me. I was in India and I was actually at an intentional community, interestingly, as we were speaking about before this. And it was an eco village in southern India. And when I was there, they had us take two herbs or two things every day. And one of those was neem and another one was spirulina. Spirulina, I don't know, that's arguably an herb. It's more of like a food thing, algae. But it's like a compound. But the neem was so interesting to me and I didn't know anything about it. So I just took it. And of course, now I know it's like anti-parasitic, it's anti-malarial, it's antimicrobial. It's just incredibly powerful. I was exposed to a lot of different stuff there, and they were just wanting to support us. But that was probably the first time I ever worked with herbs regularly in my life and realized, oh, they have an impact. There's like a thing that I can take that has an impact on my body that I'm using for a reason. I think previous to that, I'd like had teas and stuff, but that was kind of like, oh, it's a medicinal thing. But I didn't know anything about it before that. And then while I was in India, I was introduced to Tulsi, holy basil, which I have an entire podcast episode about. So if people are interested in my relationship with Tulsi, there's a lot more to share about. But that was super interesting too, because one of the things that I found that I remember about the Tulsi while I was there was not only did some people have Tulsi growing outside of their houses and as like a goddess that they were sort of like devoted to and dressing up, like decorating and stuff, which was in itself just really lovely. But they actually had Tulsi as like the afternoon tea. It was like either we would have chai or Tulsi tea. And I was working on farms and one of the farms and I was like, oh, it's so interesting because I was so into at that point I would just like have caffeine in the afternoon. It was just like that was normal for me. But I noticed that the Tulsi actually felt really good in my body and actually gave me energy in a way that I wasn't familiar with. And it tasted kind of interesting and good. And so now, like whenever I drink Tulsi, it always brings me back to India. But I drink Tulsi almost every day. So I'm like, what, constantly going back to India? I don't know. But it was that feeling of like, oh, this feels good. This tastes good. This is like an herb that people are working with in their lives. Like it was just a totally new reality for me that people were, aside from like coffee, cannabis, tobacco, and tea, like black tea or green tea, I didn't really orient myself to herbs before that. So I was like, oh, I was in this life where herbs were just a part of it. That was interesting for me. That kind of imprinted me. But then a few years later, after I graduated from college, that was like a study abroad trip I did. A few years later, I ended up on a plant walk, a random plant walk with someone who called themselves an herbalist. I didn't know what an herbalist was at that time. I might have been working with herbs. I even probably met some people who were herbalists, but I never knew what that was. So she's like, oh, I'm an herbalist and I'm leading a plant walk. So I went on the plant walk and I'd been walking these trails for months before that, months, almost every day. And as we're walking, she's naming these plants and she's talking about their medicinal actions. And I'm just like, what? These plants that I've been walking by like every day, these wild weeds or these plants that live in the forest are medicinal. Like, how did I not know that? I mean, how is this possible that the plants that live around us can support us? Like, it blew my mind. It blew my mind. So she taught us immediately, how to make a folk tincture. And so like right, I think within 10 minutes, I was making a folk tincture of Oregon grapefruit because I was out in Oregon at the time. And she had showed us how to get the inner bark out and make the tincture. And so I had immediately made my first medicine within, 10 minutes of getting off this plant walk. and that changed my life. So that was my initiation, and that was 2005. So that's a long time ago. That was the very, very, very beginning. And then since then, I have, gosh, I have probably studied with like 20 different herbalists over the years. I've done tons of programs. I got a master's degree in clinical herbalism. I also did birth work for years. And so that was really where my orientation to womb care came from. And I studied midwifery. So understanding like cycles and menstruation and hormones and all of that came from that lens. So I kind of was bridging those worlds just over time and weaving it together, which is how I got into like herbal womb wisdom world, which is what my podcast is and really what I do a lot of. But yeah, I feel like the story could go on and on and on and on, and I'll probably need to end it there. But it's been a long, meandering tapestry of a journey. Yeah.
Wow, that is so beautiful, really. We've been speaking so much recently in the women's circle and like in the podcast as well of this coming back to nature. And just that saying is like sounds very cliche, and it's something that is heard quite a lot of, like reconnecting to nature, the language of nature. Um, but there is something very interesting that like I was thinking about of, when we're in the womb, we have the umbilical cord and we're receiving our nourishment from there. And then ideally, we go to breast. Maybe we don't, maybe we go to formula, but let's just say we go to breast. And then from breast, we ideally would go back to nature. Like the little humans would be learning what foods they could eat, which ones they couldn't eat, and the ones that were acted like medicine. And I realized there was a sadness because I am so fascinated by nature. I love herbs. I love understanding what their medicine is, how we can work together. But it is definitely an effort to remember they're like as an entity, that remembrance. I have to try. I have to create a ceremony so I'm fully present to be with them. Otherwise, because my go-to, my habitual ways is just like, just make a cup of tea, put the water in there and drink it. Like, just kind of blank out. So I feel like from understanding plants more and creating a ceremony around it, there I can rekindle that relationship, but I do have to try. So I'm curious, before we get into the preconception questions, did you feel like you naturally had a relationship, or did you feel over time that your relationship deepened with plants?
No, I mean, I feel like there's always been like a spirit relationship with plants. Like, so maybe that's kind of where I came from, was more of I was into yoga before I even got into this stuff, before I went to India, I was even into yoga and I was into kind of spiritual practice. So I think that, yeah, I did have this sense of, oh, this is an entity that I'm relating to, but honestly, no, it took me so long. I grew up in the New York City area. I had no relationship to plants. I had no understanding of even seasonal lifestyle. Like none of that was a part of me. So it's been for me a very slow practice and process of coming into more relationship. And honestly, it's really interesting you mentioned that. A couple of things that came up when you were sharing. Number one, I remember, this was in 2005, probably around that same year. I was work trading on a farm in the desert of New Mexico. It was called Ojito Farm, and it was like down this arroyo. It was such a wild place to get to. It was like there was no road to get to it, and people, they said like if you can't find, or if you don't get there, if you break down on the way, you're not meant to be there. So it's like basically this place that's just randomly down this arroyo. And so we were at Ojito Farm, and there's all these people. It was kind of an intentional community yet again, and there was this 3-year-old there, and I was working in the garden, and that 3-year-old knew like all of the names of the plants and knew all of the medicinal properties of like plantain and calendula and lavender and all the basic plants, like knew how to say them, the names, and knew what they were good for and supportive for. And I was just like, oh my goodness, like she knows so much more than me. And she's 3. Yes. So that in itself, that was like reminding me of what you were saying. I'm just like, this is a thing that is
Yeah.
our ancestral lineage, like birthright, is to be in relationship with the plants. And when we grow up in a place where that's just like a part of our life, it becomes us, right? So That is one
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
That is
I
one
just
thing.
I just say before you go into the second thing, it's like my daughter, it's very interesting to observe a child in this kind of environment. So we've been in Costa Rica and Peru, and I thought that I was teaching her what to eat and what not to eat, but actually it's very interesting if I just observe her and she doesn't know a plant, she will go, even though if she didn't know it, I hadn't taught her or guided her to it. She naturally has an instinct to what she can and what she can't. And like I'm
Mm,
watching, I'm not just letting her do it. I know what the plants are around us. I have to because she wants to taste everything. So I have to make sure. But one day when I just sat and I watched her, I'm like, she doesn't know that plant and she doesn't know that plant. And she knew which one she could eat and which one she couldn't. And I was absolutely fascinated. And she inspires me every day because she remembers and she knows. And she'll say to me if I have a sore throat, let's go and get you some sage. And I'm
mm,
like, who are you though? Like, where did you come from?
mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, no, I totally think that that's true. I mean, one of the first ways that I ever learned to be in relationship with plants was this is years later after that. I was going to come to a second thing, but I think I'll leave that. This was years later after that. I was in my first apprenticeship or my second apprenticeship, but one that I actually stayed in. And this was in Western Massachusetts with a herbalist, Tony Lemos. And one of the first things she had us do was go out and find a plant that we did not know the name of. Didn't know the name of, knew nothing about it. Most of us were completely new to herbs. And I found a plant. I just like wandered over to a plant and I sat there with it. And then she said, okay, draw the plant and then just free write with the plant. Free write with the plant, whatever comes out. And so I did that. I drew the plant and then I free wrote with this plant. Turns out I learned later that this plant was black cohosh. I didn't know that before. I truly knew nothing about plants at the time. And I had in my free writing, a lot of things had come through, but one of the things that had come through was this sense that there was this energy that came up to my brain and then relaxed my body. Like I had this sense of like up to my brain and relaxed my body. And then I came back and I shared that with her and she was like, oh, that's kind of how black cohosh works. And I was just like, oh, wow, that's so interesting because I obviously didn't know that. But like what you're saying, there's different ways of knowing. And ancestrally, many cultures did not have the books and like read about the books, or even necessarily like at some point they were learning from the plants what the plants had to offer and how and what our relationship was, because it's not just like the plants are offering us all these things, like the plants are
Yeah.
also they're in relationship with us just as much as we're in relationship with them.
Mm. Wow, I love that practice actually. I will probably bring this into my women's circle. We have one on the weekend
Mm-hmm.
of like having some things in the middle and feeling inside of them because that's a big practice that we do when we're like working with energy, getting to know ourselves, tuning into intuition is when you look at something, what do you feel inside of your body? Like where does that move to? And I love what you've just shared. I'm definitely going to bring that in. And I feel like coming back to our menstrual cycle and understanding the different phases, what is happening hormonally as well, and how we can be in relationship with different plants as our allies through the time is, I think that's just such a beautiful way of one, reconnecting to nature, listening to our intuition, getting in touch with our body, and being able to remember so much about what we've lost in terms of our wisdom, our ancestral wisdom, our ability to be our own witch, our own medicine woman, all of this. And I feel like it can seem overwhelming because there's so much information. But like you just mentioned, just work with one and see what comes through. And as soon as you realize that your body receives a message in some way, that is just fascinating. And so we can strip away all these ideas that we need everything at once, like our society tells us. Learn everything, you have to know everything and use a million things at once, all the herbs, all the flavors. Like just come back simply to one, to waken your senses. And this is such a beautiful time for women who are actually hoping to call in their child, hoping to become pregnant and starting that relationship. So I know you told me that you were really excited to talk about preconception, and you've been exploring this more and more. I know this is your background as well, but it was quite alive for you when when I asked you like which area do you want to go into. So I'm curious what comes through for you when
you have people saying, okay, I'm wanting to welcome in my baby. How can we have plants as our allies? What would you recommend, or where to start?
Yeah, that's a huge question, actually, and a good one. And yes, I think this was about 6 months ago that we were initially planning this, and I had some buzz around it. I feel interested in almost every area of our womb phases. Honestly, I could probably talk pretty passionately about any of them. But in terms of if I'm thinking of preconception, if someone, it really would depend. For me, if someone came to me and they were like, oh, I'm really interested in conceiving, let's say in like 6 months or a year from now, I think that would be ideal. That's what I'm going to put out there first. I think a lot of people don't think about it until they're like ready to conceive. And then they are just like, oh, we're just trying to conceive now. And there's not a lot of, I mean, there is a lot you can support yourself with then, but it's much more supportive and helpful if you've got like 6 months or a year that you're really kind of tending the soil. It's like a garden. Literally, our bodies, especially our womb spaces, are like a garden. So when we are thinking of fertility, if we're thinking of fertility in the soil outside, it is truly not that different where you're going to kind of work into the soil. You're going to be like, oh, what does this soil need? What's going on in here? Like, are there any imbalances happening? Do I need to add compost? Do I need to add, does it need other nutrients? Like, what is happening in the soil and how do I support that? Over time, adding organic matter, whatever, that's the gardening, right? But that is exactly the same way that we need to look at our bodies, not with exactly, the same nutrients, but it's the same concept where it's like, depending on where you're at in your life cycle, depending on if you've got any imbalances going on, like, honestly, fertility from the hello.
She gave us a lot of time. She's usually in here in the first 10 minutes. So there you go. It's my daughter's here.
Oh, that's awesome. Hi. Nice to meet you. So when I think of preconception, I think of like, how do we cultivate an as optimal as possible environment in our bodies? What does that mean? So it can depend on the person what is needed. And so that would be very individualized. But if we've got, let's say, a year, and if someone's over 25, I mean, probably for most people up to like even through their 20s, it's pretty easy to not always. It depends on the person, depends on whether they have regular cycles or not and what's going on if they're ovulating. But generally, it's much easier to conceive earlier on. And then the imbalances, even if people are imbalanced earlier than that, they can still tend to conceive pretty well and have their pregnancy and everything's kind of seamless or fairly smooth. But then once you get into the 30s, it starts to be like, oh, I have those imbalances and they're longstanding and they're starting to affect me. And so now I have little things going on. So I would say start with a whole health perspective about a year out. What's going on in your digestion? Do you have symptoms that are chronic that are happening? Are you achy in your body? Do you have a sense of, do you have rashes that come up? Do you have food sensitivities? Like, I would just be starting to look at everything, not just looking at, oh, what's my period like? Because of course that is something we want to look at. It's a vital sign. It's a very important place to look. But a lot of times there's other stuff going on that could be helpful to tend to first. And so that's where I would start, is actually like looking at whole health and nourishing the body. However, I would also say if we've got a whole year, really look, especially if you're post 30, really consider like maybe doing 2 or 3 months of like a decent detox, like something to, and it could be just simplifying your diet. And it could be, and then kind of adding in some herbs that are helpful for liver, helpful for kidneys, helpful to kind of make sure you're eliminating well, moving waste out of the body, maybe alteratives, which are basically herbs that help to optimize elimination in the body. It's a weird term, but anyway, there's alternatives, and herbs like dandelion or nettles are both alternatives. So they're these herbs that are supportive for moving things out of the body, but they also are nourishing to the body. So that's kind of what I would think first, is look at the whole health, support with herbs. Like when you're thinking about herbs can help in a lot of ways. They're not the only thing we need by any stretch, especially for fertility, but they can support our mental health, our spiritual health. They can support our digestion. They can support our reducing inflammation. They can encourage our optimal hormonal health. They can encourage like all kinds of great, wonderful things in our bodies. So it just depends on the person. Okay, so a year out, maybe you're doing some nourishing with nourishing herbs. You're really like supporting yourself to maybe like detox, move things out, support your elimination, getting your systems of the body optimized in different ways. And then maybe 6 months before conception, really starting to think of like getting the nutrients you need and encouraging your tissues, including the tissues in your pelvis. So including your uterus to be more healthy. And so supporting from that lens, I'm thinking it depends on the person, what is happening for them. So we might have to be regulating the cycle and might have to be using something that is going to help regulate the cycle, whether that is like something like Vitex or something like Peony. Like there's things that you might be working with, but not everybody needs that. So I would not, I think a lot of times people are like, Vitex is the fertility herb. It's like, no, that is not necessary for everyone. There's reasons that we might work with Vitex. It is not the fertility herb. It is an herb that can be supportive for regulating our cycles, for increasing the length of our luteal phase, for helping our progesterone levels stay up. But many people don't need that at all, so that's really not something that everyone would need. If you're thinking about just cultivating a fertile space, I think about the concept of softening and moistening. So, which is also cultivating receptivity, right? So like there's the combination of those energies. It's energetically doing that and it's physically doing that. So with herbs, you might be thinking of an herb like shatavari is a really lovely herb, really nourishing and softening and moistening to the body, to both the spirit and the mind, calming for the spirit and the mind, and also moistening and supportive for literally the uterine lining and for your cervical mucus even, because it's a phytoestrogen, right? So like, or has that capacity to bind to estrogen receptors in our body, which will then encourage more optimal, cervical mucus and just a more optimal preconception environment. So you could
you
be
just
working
name
with
that again one more time? Because it just like ruffled a bit. I don't know if it was my side, but just to say the word, just only the word. Yes.
Shatavari.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you.
Asparagus racemosa, I think is the Latin name for shatavari. It's an Ayurvedic herb. So it's commonly worked with as a powder. It can be worked with as a tincture. It can be extracted pretty well as a tincture, but it's commonly worked with in Ayurveda as a powder, and it is much better absorbed with a fat. So in the form of ghee or in the form of warmed milk or something like that. It's just easier for the body to take in the medicine, or that's the Ayurvedic perspectives. It's interesting when I think about that, because in Ayurveda, they consider that the fats actually, like the ghee and the milk, will actually bring that deeper into the tissues in the body. So the medicine can kind of go into actually what is considered to be more the shukra, which is the sexual center, essentially, like the sexual vigor. I don't know what the word would be for that, but the reservoir for reproduction is the shukra, essentially. And so it's interesting because shatavari, from that traditional perspective, you take it with those fats that are also softening, moistening, nourishing. They're healthy fats for us, and they're supporting other parts of our body, and then that's kind of deeply going into the womb space and the hormones. So yeah,
I've just seen the word, how it's written. Like when you're saying it, I don't recognize it, but now I've just seen it written. And I know that I have this, and we carry loads of herbs around with us. We also carry it. I just want to say that because I'm like, oh, ta-da! Like I have a link now.
So a lot of people will pronounce it shatavari. That is a way that I think when people haven't heard other folks pronounce it, they'll say it. But I mean, in terms of like, I went to Ayurveda school and most of the Ayurvedic practitioners I know say shatavari. So anyway, that's how I say it. But yeah, it's an incredible fertility tonic herb, right? So like that is something unlike Vitex, which I think is not for everyone by any stretch. I think shatavari is really a nutritive, nourishing, lovely, softening, moistening, cultivating receptivity, all of those qualities plant. I would also look to, it depends on the person, but I would look to like reducing their stress levels. So what kinds of herbs can support with that? Reducing inflammation in their lives. Honestly, also making sure that this is totally not herbal, but you can use all the herbs in the world and you're never going to reduce your environmental exposures to toxins. You're never going to, also herbs are not going to replace actual nutrition, making sure you're getting the food you need. So I think there are so many places that herbs can support us. And there's so much that herbs can't do, right? So like they can help, they're an adjunct, but the lifestyle factors, the nutrition, the basics in that are even more important, I would say, from the fertility lens. But herbs can be very supportive.
Big shout out to our sponsor, Evolving Humans, who are the pioneers for energy healing. This practice that I was taught 4 years ago has been studied by researchers all around the world to provide evidence of the physiological effects of energy healing. And I'm not just saying this because it's a promotion, but I have used this practice every single day for 4 years, and personally I've noticed the most impact in my emotional state. This energy practice taught me how to feel energy in my body and observe the sensations. The technique involves you using your hand and connecting to the energy field within your body. And with this gentle, loving awareness that you bring to the table, everything is seen and lived. The whole being comes into alignment. During the birth of my daughter, I tore, and the discomfort that I was experiencing with this tear started to ease up dramatically when I would use this technique. In the show notes, you'll find the link to Evolving Humans so that you can explore this healing technique, which is available through a course that you can join today.
So yeah, I think nourishing infusions. So actually making sure that people are just getting minerals, honestly, like minerals in general. But one of the ways to do so from an herbal lens is to do nourishing infusions. Essentially just taking, a nutritive herb like nettles or oat straw or red raspberry or red clover. Sometimes hawthorn is used there, alfalfa, or a mix of those. Like I really like blending them depending on the person, but I think that it's just tastier when they're blended. And also, you can kind of like individualize it more. But anyway, taking a full handful of those herbs, throwing that into a quart jar or a liter, and then pouring just boiled water over it, covering it, and then steeping for 4 to 8 hours or overnight, and then straining that and drinking that, and then doing that every single day. Like I would say for somebody who is preconception and really just wanting to support themselves, that kind of practice, adding in some healthy fats with the shatavari, maybe some ashwagandha, probably, some other new cinnamon or ginger, depending on the person and what like makes sense for them, kind of to help the circulation, move those powders, which if you're taking them in powder, move them down into the uterus, because the circulatory stimulants like cinnamon, Dongquai does this too, but that's depending on the person, whether that would be good. But cinnamon, ginger are two herbs that they really have an affinity to bring the energy down to the pelvis. So I feel like that's really important too, because a lot of herbs like shatavari or potentially ashwagandha, if people were adding that in, those can be hard to digest because they're kind of like denser, right? So like adding in those circulatory stimulants, those carminative herbs can be helpful as well with them. But doing that and the nourishing infusions, I think, is a really lovely beginning for that, maybe 6 months, up to 3 months, just supporting. If people have other stuff going on, if they've got irregular cycles, if they've got other kind of needs, that's something you look case to case on what makes sense for them. But yeah.
Wow, it's so
helpful?
inspiring. Yeah, because I feel the sensation of inspiration in my body. Because I would love to have another child one day, and I feel like this time is something that we don't give ourselves. Having this time to really see what is happening instead of getting caught up in we're going to make a baby, because I don't usually get physical symptoms as such, but I get emotional ones. So like prior to Araya, when I was living a really linear life, like I was running the retreat center, I was busy all the time, I had what I would describe as depression. I was suppressing everything because I didn't have time to deal with it. I didn't know how to deal with it. Even though I was into yoga and meditation and stuff, I used that as a way to take myself out of actually what was happening. So then when I came back online and I started, tuning into my body, because I didn't have a choice because I was pregnant, I started to have these things arise. And because I didn't know what to do with them, I got really afraid of them, and came out as anger, like frustration and anger, because I was like, I can't deal with this. I don't know what to do. And then over time, slowing down and getting beneath what is there. Okay, I'm seeing all these fears, everything arises. But what helped me was starting to bring in herbal allies that would help with inflammation and help with my liver. They're the kind of two that I was drawn to naturally. Like I was drawn to nettle and dandelion, and I would take these, but I would take them as a ceremony still. I sat with them and I did it with intention to be like, I see I have these emotional arisings, and this is I have to see what's underneath this. I can't take this into motherhood because it will destroy us in some way. I can't pass this on. Like I just couldn't. And I'm not to say I don't ever get frustrated or angry. Like I literally do. But there is something about sitting and feeling like I'm not alone when I sit with the herbs. Like because sometimes speaking to somebody else, it could be they try to fix you, or there's a feeling that I'm being seen in a way that I don't want to be seen, or what I'm saying doesn't convey how I'm feeling. But when you're with a plant, they literally like, well, they don't speak in words. You don't know that language. So there's no trigger of like actual English, but they offer a feeling, a sensation. And there's this feeling of like not being alone anymore. And so I love how you open that up in the beginning, because we can start to bring in this time with ourselves, which will naturally get us into a more balanced state as we start to listen and see like what is our body calling for. And then it goes on to the point of receiving the feelings of desire and sexual attraction again, and like the moistness that you mentioned, like the juiciness, and having that life energy inside of us so that we can connect to our partner more deeply, so that when we are with our partner, whether it's just like in the space or sexually, there is a giving and a receiving, a welcoming, instead of a need to be met to like, let's have a baby, but actually meeting on that level to create life. And yeah, I'm grateful for how you took us on that journey from the start to that, and having these ideas of plants to bring in, but also being aware everyone's different and unique, which is the most beautiful thing.
I mean, I really appreciate hearing you speak to that. I think what's really interesting about the fact that you were feeling anger, and that the plants that you were drawn to were nettles and dandelion, like that really interests me for a lot of different reasons. Partly because when we think about what dandelion, for instance, can be supportive for our liver function, obviously for detoxification on different levels. But I think about the liver, and that this is probably something you're familiar with too, but it's a place where like our anger can be held, you know, like where that energy of like liver fire rising or liver fire, that's like an agitated intensity anger place. And so to support that place, even though you were experiencing it as emotions, it doesn't matter if it's emotional, it's all the same, right? Like, yes, some of us notice it more physically, some of us notice it more emotionally, some of us notice it maybe more mentally, or just don't notice it. But yeah, coming into awareness and then working with plants is really helpful. So it makes sense to me around that. And then nettles is cool too, because nettles, I mean, at least from like, and I'm not like a super astrological herbalist, but I did study like and take with Sage Popham. I took his astrological herbalism course many years ago, probably 10 years ago. And one of the things I remember from that course was him talking about nettles as a Mars plant. So Mars, I don't know, are you familiar with astrology and stuff? So Mars being kind of the warring, sort of aggressive, intense, hot plant. And it's interesting because it actually has a tendency to reduce that quality. Even though it has that quality in the body, it acts to ease and calm that quality. So it's just interesting that those are the two that you were drawn to, because I think they were so perfect for you.
Wow, that is fascinating. And at the time, honestly, it was so new to me. But I had certain pulls towards things. And after I gave birth, the other one was marshmallow root. So it's like, I'm
Yeah,
very interested. I'm curious about it, but I always forget. So then when one calls to me, I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And then for me, to help me remember, I always have jars of them ready for like each phase of my cycle. Like I have them ready. And that really just helps me just to welcome them in and get to know them in my own time. But one of the other things I wanted to share was, so now in Peru, there's different plants that I don't know. And I was feeling like moving through grief. And there's this plant called Bobansana, and it's used for lucid dreaming. But then I felt a real call to use it at this time. And I found, as I learned more about it, it's actually used to open the channel of the heart and sit with grief. So it's interesting, like what can be put on the surface as this is a lucid dreaming tea, because that's like what the fad thing is. But there's so much more to what's underneath each plant. Like you even went into like the astrology side of things. Like I've heard that, and it blows my mind, because that's not a world that I'm curious about, but still so vast for me. But there is so many layers. Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
Fascinating.
every plant, like when I think about a plant is like a person. Like they have just as many layers of themselves. They have just as many elements as we do. Action. I mean, you never go up to a person and be like, hi, 5'4", like 120-pound like person. It's like they're a whole being. And it's the same thing with plants. Like they are a whole being. So yes, they have so many different elements that they offer. And yeah, like plants are so cool because they have so many constituents. Like if you're thinking from a scientific perspective, they have so many constituents, often hundreds. So there's so many ways and different systems of the body that they tend to be working on, which I love so much. I love it so much. They're on all different layers and levels. Yeah.
Like, I love you. I love you. They can hear you. They really can.
Yeah. Oh, they know it. They know it.
We're doing like when we do yoni steaming in the circle, or when I work with someone one-on-one, I always say to them, when you're doing the yoni steaming, we gather the herbs together, to see what works with them. But I say, like, make a tea with them as well and smell it and taste it and ask like, will you be an ally? Can we sit together for this time? And it's just ceremony and ritual coming in over and over again. I love it. It sounds like I have a cat right now. I have a cat? I thought I had a daughter. What? Wait. Thank you so much for everything that you shared. I'd love you to take this time to share where we can find you. I'm going to mute myself.
I would say my Oh, I love the sounds. So I would say my podcast is probably a good first place for people to check out Herbal Womb Wisdom. If people listen to podcasts, I have 119 episodes on there, and there's so many good ones on there. I love bringing guests on, then I also have a lot of solo ones. So if this sort of thing interests you, it's a good place to get started. My website is herbalwomb.com, so you can check out anything that I'm offering there. I have a natural contraception course coming up, probably online, probably sometime this summer, maybe early fall, depending on what happens. And I do one-on-one work too. So depending on, especially for people who are looking for like more, for a deeper, like, 3-month, 6-month time together where we're really working on something that's a deeper concern, I'm available for that too. Oh, and I have a social media, Herbal Womb Wisdom. Those are good ways.
Thank you so much. You're wonderful. I've had a great conversation. Good job. I've got a blurry background, almost got a butt in there. Yes, my daughter's in the background dancing around. If you're on audio, then you'll hear her for sure. There's some things you just can't edit out of life, isn't there? They have to stay in.
And I don't think they need to be edited out. Like you're a whole human with a family, with a daughter who is young and who is free and who is like able to live in ways that show us what it means to like be playful.
Yes, and that's what we need. That's what I'm calling more of. So I'm just going to follow her lead, get naked and jump around on the bed for a little bit, probably.
Awesome. I love it.